we can find out, but that's not why we're here. We're here for Clarion Connection today. My guest today is Don Hosey from the Clarion Hospital Emergency Services, and he's the Emergency Service Manager. He's an EMT and paramedic, and basically Clarion Hospital Emergency Medical Service are the ambulances that go and save people. And I thought we could talk a little bit about what EMS is at Clarion Hospital.
The EMS service at Clarion Hospital actually provides a lot of different services for the area. The square mileage that we cover is approximately maybe 1,000 square miles, anywhere from Marionville and Forest County down through Lieber, through all the Clarion area, Clarion Limestone, North Clarion, pretty big area, New Bethlehem included, and anywhere in between distant New Bethlehem and here. We provide advanced life support. Our ambulances are usually staffed with a paramedic and an EMT to require the state requirement of an ALS unit to provide all that, appropriate emergency care that we render. We generally run approximately 5 crews around the clock, 5 ALS crews, 3 at this station in Clarion, and 1 in each outlying station, and then we still provide additional backup trucks for those people too. And we also provide, transport to inter facilities regarding, either people needing an upgrading care to Presby, Mercy, or whatever hospital happen to be in Pittsburgh or Erie or Cleveland or Philly. So that's kind of what we do.
And when someone calls you, they select the hospital to go to?
It's based on MCDs and the Clarion OES Center, the 911 dispatch. As far as to the caller's location and the municipality that caller came from. And most of the time, municipalities have to state who's going to be their first response for EMS or fire. So if it's somebody in our municipality, that would actually be dispatched to us, to either one of our 3 stations, depending on where they are.
Now in Clarion County, there's also some local ambulance services in addition to those provided by the hospital? Correct.
There's 3 other ALS services in the county. That'd be Southern Clarion, Ship and Voe Ambulance, and Knox Ambulance. And there's only 1 BLS volunteer service left in the county, and that is up in Farmington, Lieber area.
And that's basic life services?
Correct.
Okay. Now I was reading in the newspaper about some sort of activity in New Bethlehem where essentially a private company wanted to come in and offer the, let's just call it, ambulance services for that area instead of Clarion Hospital.
Correct. There was another service that did try to come in to, I guess, solicit the municipalities and local leaders of those areas regarding their services or our services. But I guess in the end, there was a lot of misinformation tossed out by certain individuals that kind of started or spearheaded it, and then once everybody actually realized that they were being misled, they were like, well, we're not changing. We had a lot of good community support from the local area and those municipalities. The community actually was contacting my staff, even me personally, wanting to keep Clarion EMS in their service areas.
I know EMS provides a lot of things that people don't consider, but this week, for instance, there was the fire in New Bethlehem where a major building was lost, and I believe you had some type of involvement with that.
We did. Actually, we had the truck that's stationed down there in the Bethlehem area was there, and also I went down additionally with another crew and brought 1 additional EMT down also, because we had to evacuate Bravo Towers beside there to get the individuals out to another location. So I provided like an EMT to be stationed where we evacuated them to. Mm-hmm. And then one of our crews actually had to treat somebody and transport them, and then we provided just additional, like if firemen needed an issue or somebody had another medical emergency, we were there to provide care. We were there from when it started, approximately 9 in the morning, till about 2:15 in the afternoon. So
you really serve as a resource in addition to the traditional or most common ambulance runs.
Oh, correct. We also have to, manage disaster plans for different, areas that nobody thinks of. Disaster plans for the interstate, disaster plans for different facilities in the area, from schools to pharmacies to even our local hospital. We have to have a disaster plan, and we have to have, certain things in order. There's just more to EMS than going out and putting a Band-Aid on somebody. I mean, I kind of made that a little generalized statement there, but EMS has a very broad scope. To do the job that we do, you have to be involved in so much, just not, how to treat somebody.
God forbid, but if something like Newtown, Connecticut happened around here, you would be responsible for assisting with that?
Yeah, all paramedics and EMS providers are required to complete like incident command structure training or mass casualty incident training basically to work as a frontline triage center to provide appropriate care, transfer people to certain places. Those kind of events get very complicated, and you have to be very fluid in your thinking of how you're going to handle things. Each situation like that is different. I've been exposed to different mass casualties on the interstate that you've had to kind of change your plan as you go, but you have to make that appropriate split-second decisions.
Well, having all the equipment necessary to run this type of operation is nice and obviously needed, but it seems more crucial is the paramedics and EMTs staffing the emergency service. What type of training do you have to go to be qualified for that?
As an EMT right now, as it stands, the required amount of hours of training, I believe, around 170 to 200. I could be off in those hours because the state's changing that as of January of 2013. Where they're going to be required to do more, and the cost is going up. And it's kind of a field that some people will either love it and you have to devote your time to it, because it's not a field that people are going to get rich off of.
Just generally, what type of salary or wages does a paramedic or EMT get in the Clarion County area?
EMTs generally start around just a little above minimum wage, around $8 or so an hour, depending on your service that you work for. Paramedics generally start around $11 or maybe a couple cents better than $11 an hour. And so that's why a lot of our paramedics, for the amount of responsibility for a paramedic to have to, they work 2 jobs, some of them work 3 jobs just to make a normal living. It's kind of disappointing when you can go to Burger King or whatever restaurant and make more money, or Walmart or whatever, and it's just disheartening to a certain extent, because there is so much responsibility on a paramedic and the EMTs that are out there from a day-to-day basis that they only get paid just a little more than minimum wage, so they work 2-3 jobs just to make a living, make ends meet sometimes. They travel all over the places, work for 3 local services,
So they put in a tremendous amount of hours?
Oh, definitely. I did that for 16 years. I worked 80 hours a week for 16 years, just to make enough, to make a decent living, where you weren't struggling from paycheck to paycheck. But it's something that you love as a paramedic. Once you become a paramedic and you do it for a certain amount of time, people love it. People that are here past 5 years in this business are usually here to stay. They love the industry. It's not something you get rich off of. It's just a sense of pride maybe that you get.
So in addition to all the qualifications for the job, you really have to love it.
You do. You have to love it. Being up for 24 hours sometimes, going from one call to another call and have to know what you're doing on each individualized call is pretty phenomenal. It's a tribute to what the crews do for any of the services in the county.
When you look at the wages that are offered and the training required and just the emergency nature of the work, is it hard to find people for these types of jobs?
Yeah, it's harder and harder to find paramedics, because the paramedic level takes a lot more additional training, and you have to work hand in hand with an emergency room physician to know the protocols, to know how to treat emergent situations, from cardiac arrest to allergic reactions and things of that nature. In the region, in the next probably 10 years, that number's going to drop off. There's only about 268 paramedics in the IMCO West region, which governs about approximately 15 counties. And if you divide 15 into 268, that's not a lot of paramedics. And that number's not increasing. And it's because of the requirements, because of the cost, and because of the wage. People can go do other things and make a lot more money. So people aren't finding the industry as hopeful or promising, I guess, to make a living.
You had mentioned that the state is going to be pushing additional requirements for background requirements, including, I think, an associate's degree.
Yeah, you have to be associated with a university after 2013 to become a paramedic and make it a 2-year program, which is, increasing the cost for everybody. Even people that try to put on a paramedic program, it just increases the cost. And to get, maybe a base salary starting at $23,000 in this state, if you want to go to a 2-year program and you can start out at $40,000, a lot of individuals are going to do that. Instead of, I'll go to a 2-year program and only get $23,000, so.
How is the EMS services funded? I know there's a drive every year, but is it primarily insurance?
Yeah, we primarily bill people's insurance companies for the services that we render, and that's based on the state's allotted ICD-9 codes of diagnostic codes of what's payable and not. Unfortunately, some things have occurred in the other end of the state. They have created the ICD-9 codes to be shrunk down to a very minimal number of things that we get paid for. And then even at that rate, we only, rough guess here, 70% of the bill gets paid. So a lot of times, we're not making a lot of money to provide services. We're just barely keeping, any services alive.
So increasing the wages of the paramedics isn't just a matter of adding more money for the insurance company.
Right, because
you're only allowed to bill so much.
Correct. We can bill $1,000, but depending on the insurance carrier, you might get $700, or you might not get that. You might get $300, and they say this is what we think you're worth. And then that's hard, one, to replace equipment, two, to increase wages. When you're spending more on fuel and wages than you're bringing in, sometimes, that's why it's so important for communities to help support any ambulance service that they have in their area. And that's why it's important for our membership drives. $50, I believe, is what it costs, and that's a pretty good insurance policy. That means, if we take you to the hospital in an ambulance and your bill was $800 and your insurance company only pays $500, if you're a subscriber, you're not responsible for the additional money owed. So that's kind of a good thing that we provide.
Well, back to this week when you helped out at New Bethlehem, I imagine there wasn't much you could charge for that, but it was a vital service.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that was absolutely nothing we can charge, but yet we spent money, fuel, time, tied up a lot of crew members to provide.
Back to Clarion Connection. I'm Ron Wilshire. My guest today is Don Hosey from the Clarion Hospital Emergency Medical Services. We were talking about the scope of the medical services, the ambulance services. And I know you also have some regional involvement.
Yeah, we do. We're part of the EMCO West region, and we call it the EMS strike teams, different ambulances around the region. If there's a disaster throughout the United States, sometimes they're called upon to provide personnel in an ambulance to respond to that disaster. Over the past few years, I know our strike team at Clarion EMS has been to Hurricane Katrina, and I believe at least for 5-7 days or longer, we had 4 crew members in an ambulance down there providing services like first line hospitals and triage and transporting people. And they also recently, the last one they were to was Hurricane Irene, and they were over in that area for an extended period of time. It was like 4 or 5 days, I believe. And that's on a regional level. You travel, as a group of ambulances from the region to go to that disaster. And that itself requires a whole nother set of requirements and clearances and training that you have to do. So it's a nice thing that we do for the area.
So you can share information and
Yeah, you share information and basically provide, you know, those EMS medical services that you need in those kind of mass casualties. You know, you have a lot of people in one location that are all touched by a disaster that these guys help out.
the Mayan calendar's predicting the end of the world on Friday. Are you prepared for that?
You know, that Mayan calendar's been wrong before. I don't think we're quite prepared at that kind of level, but I think we'll live to see Christmas next week.
Good. Speaking of Christmas, are there any special needs or problems with the holiday season in the EMS field?
Yeah, that varies from year to year. EMS is an unpredictable kind of event. You know, you may have holidays go by where you don't have many events, and then again, there's holidays go by that you will remember forever as a EMS provider. But as far as special preparation, about the only thing we're going to do is make sure there's additional crews on certain, you know, drinking nights and things of that nature. Or if we know there's a big snow event coming during the holidays, you know, we'll provide extra crews. Because we also, you know, help stat medevac out too when they need it. We provide, you know, a driver for them to transport their crew somewhere, you know, so that's another service that we do for everybody in the area. So I guess for special preps, no, we just, you know, take it as it comes. Different staffing levels maybe.
Okay, looking in the future, any plans on how to recruit new paramedics, given those constraints?
That is something that on a regional level we've been discussing at the EMCO West board meetings and things of that nature about how they're going to retain and recruit new personnel. Unfortunately, I think until the levels of pay go up, it's going to be hard to recruit them, or at least recruit them and have them stay. You know, I was told several years ago by a mentor of mine that if you, you know, like I said before, if you stay in this business 5 years, you're lucky, because most people burn out, you know, and they leave it because either pay or they just can't handle the stress from time to time. So it's a tough thing to say how you're going to recruit them now.
Are a lot of your paramedics relatively younger people then?
No. We only have probably one that she will actually is sitting for her state exam today, and she's probably going to be at least one of the youngest. I have a few that are, you know, under the age of 30, but I have a lot that are over the age of 40, and that's pretty common anywhere, you know, from different services I've talked to, from Meadville EMS to Emergent Care to the other, you know, facilities north of us.
So this isn't just a Clarion County problem. This is the whole
It's a
region.
statewide problem.
Statewide.
It really is. I mean, it's, and unfortunately, I think at some point in the future, EMS, the state's going to have to either come up with a better way of funding this, or there may not be a lot of communities that have EMS services. I was given a letter from an individual in Oklahoma referring to her husband having a heart attack, and absolutely had no EMS services, none. So she drove her husband, you know, 45 minutes to a hospital while he was having a heart attack. I mean, it worked out that he was okay, but, you know, this could happen on a bigger level. I mean, we provide a really good service and, you know, response times in our area that other parts of the United States don't have. You know, I was talking to a friend of mine that was in upstate New York, and he said that they have one ambulance service in the whole county, and they said if it's quicker for them if they have multiple patients at one scene, they just take one patient, take him to the hospital, and drive back. And because they said they don't have any other services around. So we have to be thankful and grateful for Clarion County right now having us and 3 other ALS services. Parts of the nation don't have that. And I'm afraid that the future is going to hold that, you know, it's going to unfortunately evolve to only having one ambulance, and I don't want to see that. All these small ambulance services that are around are vital to the whole industry, but until we come up with a better way to fund it, from the state level, from insurances, and from the federal level. I don't know what the future's going to hold.
Aren't there various types of emergency taxes out there that...
None that EMS receive, if you believe that one. That local occupational tax we used to have then got transferred, they referred it to the EMS fund or EMS tax. That was never meant for emergency medical services. It's municipalities that are meant to upkeep roads, bridges, and things of that nature. But EMS services don't get any of that money. And that's unfortunately a sad thing,
You think you could also tap into the 911 fee that's kind of secretly added to your phone bill?
Don't see any of that money. That all goes to the, my understanding is it's supposed to go to the operations of the 911 dispatch center, but we don't receive any of that. There's not even any federal grants, funds that a lot of ambulance can apply for anymore. We had the Homeland Security and a lot of funds out there, but none of them were allotted for EMS. You couldn't even buy a new ambulance with a grant, but there was people getting armored personnel carriers. To me, that was just something that you would kind of divvy up a little bit better, or provide, because if you don't have the EMS people, the paramedics and EMTs, a lot of it isn't going to work.
We need ambulances instead of Humvees.
Yeah, it's a cohesive system that's supposed to rely on everything else, but yeah, EMS seems to be out by itself because they assume we get lots of money from insurances, and we don't. And you can ask any service in this county, and they'll tell you the same story.
But you have a role with Clarion County has a emergency office, I believe. Randy Stallman.
Yeah, the EMA director.
Yeah,
Randy Stallman.
What's your role or connection with them?
Basically, if there's a big disaster, I would call on them for resources if I needed, and just as they would call on me for resources. It's just kind of a cooperation type thing. If they need an additional ambulance somewhere, maybe I'd be able to help them out and give them that service. Or then again, if I need, say, hazmat cleanup, I'd be able to call them, and they would help out, or they would get me different resources if I needed.
Do you find you receive any or many calls that probably don't warrant the need for an ambulance? And I know that's probably a
sometimes
difficult question.
But my guys, I try to tell them, you always just you listen to what the patient's saying and look for the wolf in the sheep's clothing, because even though some things sound simple, sometimes there might be something more involved there.
So, what's been the most rewarding part of your career?
Wow, the most rewarding part of my career.
I mean, going an 80-hour week, you have to like the job.
Some of the friends that I've made, in my business, they remember you. They may not remember your first name. They remember the thing that you did for them, or the service you provided for their loved one, their mothers, their children, their aunts, uncles. That is probably the best. And becoming part of a community, because I worked for a small service for a long time too, and I felt like part of that community. You walked down the street, everybody knew you. I might not have remembered their names too, but everybody knew you, and they treated you just like family. In that small community, invited to people's homes for dinner, or to be part of something like that. That's probably the most rewarding part. It's not money; it's the care that you get back, and the love that you get from different strangers,
So people get attached to their emergency service.
They do. In many communities, they get attached.
And even the pride in the community shows, even with those few that you mentioned that aren't affiliated with the hospital in Clarion County. I mean, it takes a lot to put those on. And actually, a little bit of history. Originally, most of the services were volunteer in Clarion County.
Correct. And unfortunately, the day of the volunteer is kind of falling by the wayside because of the requirements that you need on a year-to-year basis, continuing education and things of that nature.
I remember years ago when the New Bethlehem service first started up that I was talking to some people, and originally there were no ambulances in the area, and the funeral director or the undertaker was the one that provided the emergency service because they had the longest truck or car in town.
Yeah, that was pretty much the way it first started way back in the day. you know, anywhere in the state was all just funeral directors running their EMS. You know, the first ambulances was a hearse.
So the EMS has certainly evolved over the years, and the Clarion's played an important part in this evolution.
Yes, we have.